Chronos and Kairos, the jagged fracture in the foundation of Jerusalem, amidst the frantic, deafening whirl of a week that appeared to be nothing more than a weary repetition of centuries-old rituals. There existed a minute, jagged fracture in the flow of time itself. It was a subtle rift, a shimmering, silent tear in the heavy, dust-laden veil of the mundane, the kind of spiritual anomaly that most of us would have stepped over without a second thought, blinded by the choking dust of our own perceived urgency. We are a species tragically obsessed with the distant horizon, yet we rarely notice when the very ground beneath our feet begins to liquefy and shift. It is precisely within that fracture, if you possess the stillness of soul to pause, hold your breath, and truly observe, that you will find the master key to the most profound and shrouded mysteries of human history. The ultimate truth of that ancient, sweltering moment did not reside in the earth-shaking roars of the masses, nor in the feverish, wine-soaked revelry of crowds intoxicated by the volatile, desperate spirit of the Passover festival. Instead, it hid within the quietest of traces, the most humble of geometries, the faint, crimson stains marking the rough, splintered wooden doorframes of peasant homes. This was no mere aesthetic choice or cultural decoration. It was a visceral, bleeding demarcation, a line drawn in hemoglobin between the fragile, trembling boundaries of survival and the cold, inevitable embrace of the reaper. If you can truly allow the weight of that reality to settle into the marrow of your spirit, your entire lens for viewing this week will shatter into 1,000 useless shards. The comfortable, dusty fragments of tradition will fall away, making room for a truth that is as agonizingly brutal as it is blindingly glorious. You have likely heard this narrative 100 times, perhaps as dry, sterile historical data etched into the cold surfaces of museum stone, or as polished, rhythmic sermons delivered from the safe, air-conditioned comfort of a pulpit. But there is a chilling, bone-deep reality that few dare to voice plainly. In that same week, at that exact destined hour, within the claustrophobic limestone walls of the world's most sacred citadel, two parallel scripts were unfolding with a terrifying, mathematical precision that defies the laws of chance. On one side of the city, tens of thousands of innocent white lambs were being led to their systematic slaughter on the blood-slicked altars of the temple, their frantic bleating lost in the thick, ritualistic smoke of burning fat. And at that very same moment, on a barren, skull-shaped hill just outside the city gate, a man was drawing his final, agonizing breath in the exact same manner, at the exact same hour. He carried a weight of cosmic significance, so vast that the screaming throngs below were utterly incapable of perceiving the tectonic shift occurring in the heavens above them. The people were watching a common murder. The universe was witnessing a ransom. The most terrifying aspect of this history is not the calculated cruelty of the death itself. We are well acquainted with the depths of human cruelty. It is our oldest language. No, the haunting fact is that an entire city stood there, witnessed it with their own eyes, touched the rough wood of the cross in passing, and felt the blistering, indifferent heat of the sun, yet remained completely blind to the moment that was permanently redirecting the current of human existence. Jerusalem, in 33 A.D., was far more than an ancient metropolis of towering limestone, deep shadows, and narrow, winding alleys that smelled of spices and decay. It was a colossal, breathing machine, a living entity fueled by three volatile elements: a faith that burned like the unforgiving desert sun, a deep-seated ancestral memory of slavery, and a gnawing, existential dread of the Roman iron boot that pressed perpetually against their collective necks. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims surged through the dust-choked arteries of the empire, traveling from the far reaches of the Mediterranean to the rugged, sun-scorched borders of Persia, just to reach this spiritual epicenter. They did not come empty-handed. They brought their families, their meager life savings, and their finest livestock creatures that had been meticulously inspected for any blemish, scar, or flaw. They also carried a heavy, invisible burden of unspoken sorrows, hidden shames, and a long-suppressed yearning for a liberation that felt forever out of reach. The city was so congested that space itself seemed to vanish, replaced by a suffocating wall of human heat. The air grew thick and heavy, a strange and heady concoction of acrid incense smoke drifting from the golden altars, the primal, earthy scent of livestock, and the warm, clean aroma of unleavened bread being pulled from thousands of family hearths. Yet, beneath the chaotic commerce and the festive noise of the marketplaces, a haunting realization hung in the air like the static charge before a coming storm. These people had not gathered merely to celebrate a holiday or trade goods. They had come to remember a trauma and a triumph. They were wading back through the tides of time to a night of both horror and majesty in the distant shadow of Egypt. They were remembering a night where the line between life and death was as thin as a single stroke of blood on a lintel. What none of them realized in the year 33 AD was that this memory was no longer being recited through dry, repetitive liturgy. It was being reenacted in living flesh and breaking bone right before their eyes, with a realism that was nothing short of haunting. To truly grasp the magnitude of these events, we must retreat more than a millennium into the past, to a time when the world was younger and the stakes were more visible to the naked eye. In those days, Passover was not a colorful festival. It was a desperate, bloody battle for survival. According to the ancient statutes, each family had to select a perfect lamb, flawless, without a single spot, and bring it into their home to live with them for 4 long days. Imagine the raw, uncomfortable intimacy of that setting. You saw the creature every morning when you woke. You heard its soft, innocent bleating in the quiet of the night, a sound that pierced the darkness and reminded you of its vulnerable presence. You felt its wool, soft as velvet and white as a cloud, beneath your fingers. The children of the house would naturally grow attached, naming the creature and treating it like a member of the family, a pet, a friend. This was not a quirk of the law or a ceremonial whim of a distant, capricious god. It was a masterstroke of spiritual psychology. For when a sacrifice becomes personal, when it becomes a part of the home, a presence in the room, its loss becomes a soul-tearing agony. Only that specific brand of pain possesses the weight necessary to shatter a hardened human heart. It forces a person to understand the true, staggering cost of atonement. Sacrifice without love is merely a bureaucratic procedure, a cold transaction of religious accounting. Sacrifice born of love is redemption. During those 4 fateful days, the lamb was not merely being checked for physical defects. It was being absorbed into the daily fabric of the family's life. The elders watched its gait to ensure it did not limp. The children looked deep into its black, trusting eyes. An invisible but unbreakable bond of affection was forged in the mundane moments of sharing a roof and a meal. And then, at the zenith of that connection, at the very moment the bond was strongest, they had to slaughter it with their own hands. The muffled sobs of the children, the hollow, grief-stricken gaze of the adults, and the terrifying warmth of the blood on the doorframe. This was the price paid so that life could endure. This was the cost of being passed over by death. Now, pause and witness the spine-chilling convergence of 33 AD. That exact pattern repeated itself with surgical, divine detail. On the 10th day of the month of Nisan, at the precise moment when tens of thousands of families in Jerusalem were bringing their lambs into their homes, a man also entered the gates of the city. He did not come mounted on a thundering warhorse, flanked by steel-clad legions to flaunt his power. He chose the back of a young donkey, the universal symbol of peace, of the commoner, and of profound, almost jarring humility. The crowds erupted in a frenzy of adoration that bordered on madness. They carpeted his path with palm branches and their own cloaks, shouting hosannas as if he were a political messiah, come to break the Roman yoke with fire and sword. They believed they were welcoming a king who would conquer the world. The reality, however, was far grimmer and more beautiful than their limited imaginations could fathom. They were unconsciously selecting the ultimate sacrifice of human history. For the next 4 days, this man was granted not a single moment of respite. He was interrogated, cornered, and scrutinized from every conceivable angle. He was probed by the powerful religious elites who feared for their status, by calculating political minds seeking a strategic advantage, and by cynical philosophers looking for a logical flaw. They searched for a crack in his logic, a heresy in his doctrine, the tiniest stain on his character, or the smallest inconsistency in his actions. They were, in every sense, inspecting the lamb, desperate to find a single defect that would allow them to discard him. Yet, after every brutal cross-examination, after every trap set, and every lie whispered, not a single accusation could hold weight. Finally, Pilate, a pagan, a man of blood, the representative of the cold, absolute power of Rome, was forced to stand before the mob and utter a sentence that would echo through the corridors of eternity. I find no fault in this man. There it was. The ultimate criteria of the sacrificial lamb, absolute purity, without blemish. A sanctity that could not be tarnished by any worldly corruption, even under the most intense pressure of an impending execution. While that suffocating interrogation was taking place in the halls of power, the rest of the city was in a fever of preparation. Every alleyway was scrubbed. People searched every crack, every dark corner, and every floorboard of their homes to find the smallest crumb of leaven yeast to cast it out into the fire. They knew that leaven made dough rise and expand, but they also knew that in its essence, it was the very thing that caused decay and souring from within. It was an act of profound, tragic symbolism. Deep down, humanity fears the silent rot of the soul far more than any external assault. They cleaned their houses with obsessive care, but they utterly neglected to purge the leaven of hatred, the bitterness of envy, and the swelling pride that was fermenting in their own hearts. That night, in a secluded upper room, far removed from the city's roar and the clatter of Roman shields, a meal took place. But it was no ordinary festive gathering. It was the moment when the entire symbolic system of humanity was cataclysmically overturned. The bread was no longer just bread. The wine was no longer just wine. The one at the head of the table, the one they called Master, Lord, and King, performed an act that left his disciples paralyzed with shock and embarrassment. He knelt. He took a basin of water and touched the dusty, foul-smelling, calloused feet of his followers, tenderly washing them clean. This was not a theatrical performance or a hollow moral lesson for the history books. It was a manifesto in motion. True power does not reside at the head of the table or in the subservience of others. It resides in how low you are willing to bend to serve and love those who may soon betray you. But the peak of the story did not occur in that warm, candle-lit room. It happened in the black, suffocating hours that followed, when the city was bathed in a pale, cold moonlight. The man did not choose to hide in the labyrinthine shadows of the mountains or flee to the safety of the desert. He walked directly into the Garden of Gethsemane, an open, public space where his enemies could easily find him. There are moments in life when you see a hurricane approaching, and instead of fleeing to save yourself, you choose to stand firm and walk directly into the eye of the storm with an uncanny, terrifying calm. Everything that followed was as swift and brutal as a fever dream. The betrayal by a friend's kiss, the midnight arrest under the glare of torches, the mockery of a trial, the humiliation of lashes that tore flesh from bone, and finally, the sentence of death. And then, at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the very moment the silver trumpets blasted from the temple to signal the start of the mass slaughter of the lambs, he died on the hill of Golgotha. At the exact same time, not a second early, not a minute late, the trumpets announcing the death of the animals merged with the final, echoing breath of a man. This cannot be dismissed as a mere coincidence of fate or a lucky alignment of history. This was the violent convergence of two great rivers of time, one that began with the blood-stained liberation of slaves in ancient Egypt, and one that concluded with the eternal spiritual redemption of all humanity in Jerusalem. Had the story ended at that agonizing death, it would have been nothing more than a tragedy, a story about a good man crushed by the gears of tyranny. But it was what happened next that inverted every known law of human logic and physics. The following day, Jerusalem was buried in a silence so heavy, it felt like it could suffocate the living. No movement, no hope. Those who had followed him, those who had sworn loyalty unto death, were now huddling in locked rooms, trembling at every footstep in the hall, terrified of their own execution. They were not the majestic, glowing saints seen in Renaissance paintings. They were broken, terrified, ordinary people who had lost everything they believed in. But then, at the dawn of the third day, before the first rays of sun could pierce the heavy morning mist, a spiritual earthquake struck the foundation of the world. The tomb was empty. There were no signs of a grave robbery, no chaos of a break-in, no struggle. There were only the fine linen shrouds, lying exactly where they had been, folded neatly, as if the entity inside had simply passed through them to return to life in an entirely new state of being. Consider the raw, startling authenticity of this detail. If this were a story fabricated to launch a new religion, the writers of that era would never have cast women as the primary witnesses, for in ancient society, the testimony of a woman held no legal standing in a court of law. It would have been a poor marketing strategy. Furthermore, they would never have portrayed their founding heroes as cowards who fled in the night and hid behind locked doors. It is precisely these illogical, deeply human details that serve as the ironclad evidence of the event's truth. No one invents a lie in which they are the pathetic, faithless failures. And then, a transformation that defied both science and psychology spread like a forest fire through the dry brush of the empire. Those who had been hiding in the shadows suddenly stepped into the light. They stood before the highest powers of Rome and Judea without a tremor of fear in their voices. They were ready to endure systematic torture, to face wild beasts in the arena, to be crucified upside down or burned alive as torches, not for an abstract ideology or a clever philosophy, but because they maintained one unshakable physical fact. They had seen the dead man living. What could transform a crowd of cowards into fearless warriors in just a few short weeks? Not a theory, not a vague hope, only an undeniable, physical experience, a truth that had touched the very marrow of their souls, making death no longer a terror, but merely a doorway to a greater glory. Since then, Passover has been observed every year, but its deepest meaning was forever altered. The lamb was no longer a mindless animal, sacrificed annually to cover a debt. The sacrifice was no longer a repetitive ritual to temporarily soothe a guilty conscience. It became a once-and-for-all event, a permanent landmark that redefined the destiny of the human race. When this story moves beyond the confines of religion, it becomes a profound and painful lesson on the human condition. It teaches us that the most dangerous threat to a human being is not a loud natural disaster or an invading army, but the leaven of pride, hypocrisy, and hidden bitterness that silently rots our souls from the inside out every day. It reminds us that true history is not written on glamorous boulevards or in the soaring, ego-driven speeches of victors, but in the minute details, the solitary decisions made in the dark, and the acts of service that most people ignore because they are too distracted by their own vanity. What you consider mundane and obvious today, the seemingly insignificant choices of your daily life, the people you pass in the street, might be the starting point for a seismic shift that you will only fully understand years later, or perhaps only at the very end of all things. Think of that anonymous father in Jerusalem that year. He had diligently kept the lamb in his house for 4 days. He watched his children play with it, stroking its head, and then he had to perform the painful, necessary slaughter with his own hands. His heart was breaking, yet he was utterly unaware that just a few streets away, a tragedy and a grace of infinitely greater magnitude were unfolding to change the fate of his family and all of humanity forever. He was so busy with his small, familiar ritual that he was blind to the great reality standing on the horizon. How many times in our own lives are we just like that father? We stand in the very center of moments that could pivot our destiny, yet we remain preoccupied with the trivial anxieties of daily survival and the logistics of our routines. We witness the miraculous happening at our very doorstep, but we casually dismiss it as business as usual. We often only truly understand the value of a moment when it has already retreated forever into the past, leaving only the hollow, echoing ache of regret. This is not merely a story of faith. It is a story of how we face truth. There are monumental truths that often hide beneath the skin of the small and the ordinary. There are great turning points in a life that begin with the simple, quiet act of kneeling to wash someone's feet, or the silent endurance of an injustice. The final question is not what actually happened in 33 A.D. in the dust of Jerusalem. The real question is for you, in the here and now, right now, in your own life. What magnificent things are unfolding? What opportunities are knocking at your door? What precious people are present, whose true value you have yet to realize? If these words cause you to pause for even a single heartbeat and look back at the long journey you've traveled, cherish that feeling. For sometimes, a story told at the right time in the right way can reignite the meaning of a life sinking into the cold shadows of uncertainty. And if you feel your heart stir even slightly, share that spark. Because somewhere out there, another person is standing in their own crowded, noisy city, witnessing miracles with eyes that are not yet open. Do not be the one who watches history unfold without realizing that you are, and have always been, a vital part of it.